Mornings had become a struggle. I could barely drag myself out of bed. I knew I needed to see a doctor, and when the diagnosis came, it hit me like a freight train. I had an autoimmune disorder, something I'd have to live with for the rest of my life. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it was chronic, requiring ongoing medication and lifestyle adjustments. The doctor was hopeful, saying that with proper treatment, I could lead a relatively normal life. Yet, the word normal felt hollow in that moment. I was terrified, but I kept my fear hidden. I had always been the strong one, the pillar of support for Emily and the kids. How could I admit to Emily that I was scared and felt like my body was betraying me? So, I did what I always did. I kept my struggles to myself and pushed through the pain, exhaustion, and constant anxiety. I told Emily about the diagnosis, of course, but I downplayed it, making it seem like a minor issue. I reassured her that everything was under control and that the doctors had it all figured out. She was understandably concerned but trusted me when I said I could handle it. I wanted to be the man who could bear any burden without flinching, who could keep everything together no matter what. But inside, I was falling apart. The illness took a greater toll on me than I was willing to admit. The medications helped, but they came with side effects, dizziness, nausea, and a fogginess that made concentrating difficult. I began to withdraw from Emily, the kids, and everything that once brought me joy. It wasn't intentional, but it was happening nonetheless. I was present physically but emotionally distant, a shadow of my former self. Emily noticed, of course, how could she not? She asked if I was okay, if there was anything I wanted to talk about. I always brushed her off, claiming I was just tired from work. I didn't want to burden her further or show her how weak I felt. Yet, in trying to protect her, I was pushing her away, creating a gap between us that neither of us could bridge. And so, life continued. The kids grew older, Emily managed the household and stayed busy with them, and I kept working, maintaining the facade that everything was fine. But the cracks were widening with each day, and I was too engulfed in my own misery to notice. I loved Emily and our life, but I was slowly losing myself in the connection that had once been the foundation of our marriage. The party was meant to be a break, a chance to relax and escape the pressures of home. Emily had suggested it, having heard about it from a friend, an informal gathering at a mutual acquaintance's house, with drinks, music, and conversation. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I agreed, thinking it might do us some good since we hadn't been out in a while. The evening started off calmly. We dropped the kids at my parents' house for the night and headed to the party. The drive was quiet, filled with only the soft hum of the radio. I felt the familiar weight of tension in my chest but tried to focus on Emily and the night ahead. She looked stunning as always, dressed in a simple yet elegant dress. I couldn't shake the guilt of not being the husband she deserved recently. When we arrived, the house was already lively, laughter and conversation spilled into the night as we walked up the driveway. Inside, the warm glow of lighting and the mingling sense of cologne and perfume created a welcoming atmosphere. Emily's face lit up as she recognized familiar faces and immediately joined a group of women she knew. I lingered near the entrance, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I scanned the room, recognizing a few faces from past events, coworkers, neighbors, friends of friends. They all seemed at ease, and I envied their comfort. Whether it was the illness, stress, or my own insecurities, I felt disconnected, like I was watching the party through a glass. After a few moments, I forced myself to mingle, trying to shake off the heavy cloud hanging over me. In the kitchen, I poured myself a drink and struck up a conversation with someone I vaguely remembered. We discussed work and other trivial topics while my mind wandered back to Emily, wondering how she was faring and what she was talking about with her friends. As the night went on, the party grew livelier, with music getting louder and conversations becoming more animated. The warmth of the whiskey dulled the persistent ache in my head and the weariness in my bones. For a brief moment, I almost felt normal, as if I could forget the weight of everything pressing down on me. Eventually, I found Emily in the living room, surrounded by people I didn't know. She was the center of attention, her laughter rising above the music. I watched her from a distance, admiring how she charmed everyone around her. I used to take pride in that, but now, seeing her from afar, I felt a strange mix of jealousy and fear. She noticed me and smiled, waving me over. I joined her, slipping my arm around her waist, trying to push down the unease that had been growing inside me all night. We made small talk about jokes, stories, and other light banter, but beneath it all, I could sense the tension and something being off, even if I couldn't pinpoint it. Then, I noticed a guy lingering at the edge of our group, too polished, too perfect, like he'd stepped out of a magazine. He was tall and confident, drawing people to him effortlessly. When he caught Emily's eye, she gave him a smile that made him feel like the most important person in the room. At first, it was subtle, just a few exchanged glances and brief eye contact. But as the night progressed, their interactions became more frequent and focused. Emily laughed a bit too loudly at his jokes and leaned in a little too close. I tried to dismiss my feelings as paranoia, blaming the alcohol for distorting my perceptions. But the longer I watched, the more I felt a gnawing sense of dread. I wanted to intervene, to pull Emily back to me, but I was paralyzed, unable to move or stop what was unfolding. At one point, Emily turned to me, her eyes sparkling with a mischievous glint. She leaned in and whispered, "I'm going to grab another drink. Do you want anything?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "No, I'm good." She winked at me, then turned and walked away, heading back to the kitchen where the guy had gone moments before. I watched her go, feeling like I was watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. I stayed where I was, trying to act casual, trying to keep up the facade of being just another guest enjoying the party, but my mind was racing, my heart pounding in my chest as I replayed the night's events over and over in my head. I didn't know what to do, didn't know if I was overreacting or if my worst fears were starting to come true. As the minutes ticked by, Emily didn't return. I waited, glancing toward the kitchen every few seconds, trying to keep my panic in check. But when she finally did come back, she wasn't alone. The guy was with her, and they were talking, their heads close together as they walked. The party had reached that point where the alcohol was flowing freely, and the conversations had grown louder, more uninhibited. Emily was in her element, laughing and chatting with everyone, her energy infectious. I tried to keep up, but my mind was elsewhere, still haunted by the events of the past few months, the weight of my illness, the growing distance between us that I couldn't seem to bridge. We'd been mingling with a group of people in the living room for a while now. Most of them were familiar faces, friends and acquaintances we'd known for years. But then there was him, the guy who seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, stealing all of Emily's attention. Tall, confident, with that kind of effortless charm that made everyone gravitate toward him. I didn't know his name, and at this point, I didn't care to. As the evening went on, I noticed how Emily kept drifting closer to him, how her laughter seemed a little too genuine, her smiles a little too bright. I felt a gnawing sense of unease, but I pushed it down, telling myself, I was being paranoid after all, we were just at a party, what could really happen? I was standing with a few other guests, half listening to a conversation about someone's recent vacation when I saw it happen. Emily was leaning in close to the guy, her hand resting on his arm as she whispered something in his ear. He chuckled, his hand grazing her waist in a way that made my stomach turn. I could feel the eyes of others on us, people beginning to notice the way she was acting, the way I was pretending not to. Before I could even think about what to do, Emily suddenly straightened up, her eyes flashing with a mischievous light. She turned to me, and in a voice that cut through the room like a knife, she said, "Hey, what do you think about me ********************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************************** All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, the blood rushing in my ears. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Emily's words hung in the air, heavy and toxic, poisoning everything around us. Everyone was staring at us, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a sick kind of curiosity. I felt the floor drop out from under me, the world tilting on its axis as I struggled to process what she had just said. My face burned with humiliation, my mind racing to catch up with the reality of the situation. Emily just stood there, a smirk playing on her lips, as if daring me to react. There was a challenge in her eyes, a defiance that I had never seen before. It was as though she wanted to push me, to see how far she could go, to see if I would finally snap. For a moment, I couldn't speak, I couldn't breathe. My entire body felt like it was made of lead, weighing me down, keeping me rooted to the spot as everyone around us waited for my response. I wanted to shout, to grab her and drag her out of there, to demand an explanation for why she was doing this. But all I could do was stand there, paralyzed by shock and betrayal. The guy, to his credit, looked just as stunned as everyone else. He glanced at me, then back at Emily, as if unsure whether she was serious or just playing some twisted joke. But the way she looked at him, the way her body angled towards him, made it clear that she wasn't kidding. Finally, I managed to force out a hoarse, "What the hell are you talking about, Emily?" She tilted her head, feigning innocence, though her eyes gleamed with something far darker. "Oh, come on, don't be such a prude," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're all adults here, right? Why shouldn't I have a little fun?" The people around us shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of what to do. Some of them exchanged glances, while others pretended not to hear, staring into their drinks as if they could will themselves invisible. But no one said anything. No one stepped in to defuse the situation. It was like we were all trapped in some bizarre alternate reality where the normal rules no longer applied. I felt a wave of anger surge through me, hot and fierce, but it was quickly doused by the cold, overwhelming sensation of helplessness. I had no idea how to handle this, how to respond to the fact that my wife had just publicly suggested sleeping with another man right in front of me. And not just any man, a man who was standing there, listening to every word, knowing that. I was powerless to stop it. Emily took a step closer to me, her smirk widening as she looked me up and down. "What's wrong, babe? You know you're not exactly at your best these days," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I mean, look at you. You're always tired, always sick. I think I deserve a little fun, don't you?" Her words cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. It wasn't just the suggestion of infidelity that hurt, it was the way she threw my illness back in my face, using it as a weapon to justify her actions. The humiliation was unbearable. The weight of everyone's eyes on me made it hard to breathe. I wanted to say something, anything, to defend myself, to defend our marriage, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stand there, my fists clenched at my sides, trying to hold on to some semblance of control as the world crumbled around me. The guy finally cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe we should," but Emily cut him off, turning to him with that same wicked smile. "Oh, don't worry, I'm just messing with him," she said, her tone light and carefree. "He knows I'm joking, right, babe?" She looked at me expectantly, her eyes daring me to contradict her. But I couldn't. I knew that if I called her out, if I accused her of crossing the line, it would only make things worse. I would be the one who looked like a fool, the one who overreacted, the one who couldn't take a joke. And I couldn't bear the thought of giving everyone even more reason to pity me. So I swallowed my pride, forced a smile that felt more like a grimace, and nodded. "Yeah, right." The tension in the room eased slightly, the guests letting out nervous chuckles as if grateful that the moment had passed. But I knew the damage had been done. I could feel it in the way they looked at me, the way they avoided my eyes, the way they whispered to each other when they thought I wasn't listening. Emily didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't care. She just laughed, giving me a quick peck on the cheek before turning back to the guy, resuming their conversation as if nothing had happened. I stood there, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life, the reality of my situation sinking in like a stone in my gut. This wasn't just a party anymore. This was the moment I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about the woman I had loved for so long, was a lie. And there was nothing I could do to change it. I stood there, trapped in the wreckage of my own life, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. Emily was back to chatting with that guy, laughing like she hadn't just humiliated me in front of everyone. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. I needed to get out, to escape the crushing weight of my shame. Without a word, I turned and made my way to the bathroom. I needed a moment alone, a moment to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. As I pushed open the bathroom door and stepped inside, the sounds of the party faded behind me, leaving only the pounding of my heart in my ears. I leaned over the sink, gripping the edges so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror, a man. I barely recognized myself, pale, drawn, with eyes wide and wild with confusion. I splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would snap me out of the daze I was in, but it didn't help. The image of Emily smirking as she suggested ing that guy was burned into my mind. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My thoughts raced in circles. What was I supposed to do? Leave her? Confront her? Demand that she explain herself? None of it made sense. This wasn't the woman I married, the woman I had built a life with. I had no idea who she was anymore. After a few minutes, I forced myself to take a deep breath and step away from the sink. I couldn't hide in the bathroom forever. I had to face whatever was happening, no matter how much it hurt. But when I opened the door and walked back into the hallway, Emily was gone. The spot where she'd been standing with that guy was empty. My pulse quickened as I scanned the room, hoping to spot her somewhere, anywhere, so I could drag her out of there and try to make sense of what was happening. I approached one of our mutual friends, a woman named Sarah, who was standing nearby chatting with someone else. "Have you seen Emily?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Sarah gave me an awkward smile, clearly aware of the tension from earlier. "Yeah, she went upstairs. I think she said something about grabbing her coat." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as dread settled in the pit of my stomach. "Did she go alone?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "She was with that guy, you know, the one she was talking to earlier." My heart dropped. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I turned and headed straight for the stairs, taking them two at a time. My mind raced with 1,000 different thoughts, none of them good. I needed to find her, needed to stop whatever was happening before it went too far. But deep down, I knew I was already too late. When I reached the second floor, the hallway was dimly lit, the noise from the party below muffled by the walls. There were several closed doors, each one leading to a different room. My hands shook as I started checking them one by one. The first door opened to a dark, empty bedroom, no sign of Emily. The second was a bathroom, also empty. I moved quickly to the third, my chest tightening with every step. When I opened the door, my worst fear was realized. There, on the bed in the middle of the room, was Emily. She was in the crab position, her back arched, legs spread wide, and that guy, the one who had been all over her downstairs, was behind her, thrusting into her with a look of pure animalistic satisfaction on his face. The sound of their bodies colliding filled the room, a sickening rhythm that made my stomach turn. My world shattered in that instant. It was as if time had stopped, and I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to comprehend the sheer brutality of what I was witnessing. My wife, the woman I had loved and cherished for so many years, was another man right in front of me. And the worst part was, she didn't even seem to care. She moaned, her head thrown back in ecstasy, as if I didn't exist. It was as if everything we'd built together meant nothing. The room spun around me, the edges of my vision blurring as rage, betrayal, and disbelief crashed over me like a tidal wave. Without thinking, I stormed into the room, my voice shaking with fury as I shouted, "What the hell is going on here?" Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock as she finally realized I was there. For a split second, she froze as if caught in the act before she pulled away from the guy, scrambling to cover herself with the sheet. He backed off too, his face a mask of confusion and panic, clearly not expecting to be caught like this. "What the ***, Emily?" I yelled, my voice breaking as the full weight of her betrayal crashed down on me. "What the hell are you doing?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. Finally, she managed to stammer out, I didn't think you'd come up here. Didn't think I'd come up here? I repeated, incredulous. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of her words. You're King another guy, Emily, in the middle of a party. Do you even understand what you've done? She wrapped the sheet tighter around her body, her eyes narrowing as she seemed to gather her thoughts. I told you downstairs, didn't I? She said, her voice cold and detached, as if this was somehow my fault. I said I wanted to have a little fun. You just didn't listen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like I was losing my mind, like everything was spinning out of control. This isn't fun, Emily. This is sick. How could you do this to me, to us, to our family? The guy, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Hey, man, I didn't know she was married. Shut up. I snapped, my anger flaring hotter than ever. I didn't care about his excuses, didn't care about anything except the fact that my wife had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way possible. Emily didn't even look at him, her focus was entirely on me, her expression hardening as she seemed to make a decision. You're right, she said, her voice low and cutting. Maybe this isn't fun anymore. Maybe I've just had enough of being your sick, tired wife. Maybe I need something more. Her words were like a knife to my heart, twisting deeper with every syllable. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the air too thick to breathe. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to make the pain stop, but all I could do was stand there, stunned and broken, as the woman I loved ripped my world apart. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of their hurried whispers and rustling sheets fading as I made my way back down the stairs. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I didn't know where I was going, didn't know what I was going to do, all I knew was that my life would never be the same again. I stumbled out of the house, my mind in a haze, barely aware of my surroundings. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it did nothing to clear the fog of disbelief and pain clouding my thoughts. All I knew was that I needed to get away, to put as much distance between myself and the horror I had just witnessed as possible. My feet carried me down the driveway toward the street where my car was parked, but I didn't have a destination in mind. All I could think about was the image of Emily in that room, twisted in a way I never thought I'd see outside our bedroom, with another man. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it was as if she had torn out a piece of my soul and crushed it underfoot. As I reached my car, fumbling for the keys in my pocket, I heard the sound of hurried footsteps behind me. I turned, and there she was, Emily, rushing out of the house, still clutching the sheet around her like a makeshift shield. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild with a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to decipher. Wait, she called out, her voice cracking with desperation. Just wait a second, please. I paused, though every instinct told me to get in the car and drive away, to leave her and everything else behind. But something in her voice, in the way she looked at me, stopped me in my tracks. I couldn't believe I was standing there, even giving her the chance to say anything more, but I couldn't just walk away, not yet. She slowed as she reached me, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps as if she had run a marathon to catch up. I need to explain, she said, her voice trembling. Please, just let me explain. I echoed, my voice thick with disbelief. What the hell could you possibly explain? Emily, I saw everything. You were another guy. There's nothing to explain. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, shaking her head as if trying to clear her thoughts. It's not what you think, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw you, okay? At that restaurant with her. You were laughing, smiling, you looked so happy. For a moment, I didn't understand what she was talking about. I just stared at her, trying to make sense of the disjointed words spilling from her lips. What are you talking about, Emily? I asked, my patience wearing thin. The restaurant, she repeated, her voice rising as her emotions got the better of her. I saw you last week at Le Jardin with that girl. You were laughing with her like you were on a date or something. I thought you were cheating on me. Realization hit me like a freight train, and I felt the blood drain from my face. You mean that's what this is about? I repeated, my mind racing. She nodded, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. Yes, I saw you with her, and I didn't know what to think. You looked so close, so intimate. I thought I had lost you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the car, struggling to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. Emily, I said slowly, each word measured and deliberate, that woman, that was my sister. My sister, Emily. I hadn't seen her in over a year, and we were just catching up. She was only in town for a few days, and we met for lunch. That's it. Her face crumpled as the weight of her mistake settled over her. Your sister, she repeated, her voice barely audible. Oh my God, I didn't know, I was so sure. My anger flared again, hot and fierce, as the full extent of what she had done hit me. So what? I snapped. You thought I was cheating on you, and your solution was to run off and *CK the first guy who paid attention to you. Is that what you thought was going to fix things? She shook her head frantically, her hands clutching the sheet tighter around her body as if she could somehow shield herself from the consequences of her actions. No, it wasn't like that. I was hurt and angry, and I didn't know what to do. I thought you didn't love me anymore, that you'd moved on, and I wanted to hurt you like I thought you were hurting me. Her words only deepened the wound. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You succeeded. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible. She broke down completely then, sobbing openly, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. I'm so sorry, she choked out, the words barely intelligible through her tears. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't know what else to do. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for so many years, the mother of my children, and felt nothing but a deep, aching emptiness. I wanted to believe her, wanted to somehow make this right, but the damage was done. The betrayal had cut too deep, and there was no going back. I don't know what to say, Emily, I said finally, my voice hollow. I don't even know who you are anymore. She reached out for me, her fingers trembling, but I took a step back, out of her reach. Please, she begged, her voice breaking. Please don't leave. We can fix this, we can make it right. I'll do anything, just don't leave me. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease the pain in her voice, but I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I just shook my head, turning away from her and opening the car door. Goodbye, Emily. I said quietly before getting into the car and closing the door behind me. As I drove away, her sobs echoed in my ears, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I knew was that everything had changed and there was no going back to the way things were before. My marriage, my life, everything was shattered beyond repair. I drove through the dark, empty streets with a hollow feeling in my chest, the events of the night replaying in my mind like a broken record, Emily's desperate apologies, her tearful explanation, it all swirled together in a blur of confusion and pain. But the one thing I knew for certain was that I couldn't stay with her that night. I needed space, distance, anything to clear my head and figure out what to do next. Before I knew it, I was pulling into the driveway of my parents' house. The familiar sight of their home, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light, brought a small measure of comfort, but it was fleeting. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't ready to face them, to explain why I was showing up in the middle of the night, broken and lost. But I had no other choice. After a few minutes, I forced myself to get out of the car and walk up to the front door. I hesitated for a moment, then rang the doorbell. The sound seemed to echo in the stillness of the night, loud and intrusive. It didn't take long for my father to answer. He opened the door, looking surprised but not alarmed. "Mark," he said, his voice laced with concern. "What are you doing here?" "It's late." I tried to smile, but it felt like a grimace. "I'm sorry to show up like this, Dad. I didn't know where else to go." He stepped aside, ushering me in without hesitation. "Of course, son. Come in. Your mother's already in bed, but I'll wake her up." "No," I said quickly, shaking my head. "Don't wake her. I just need to talk. I need to get this out." He led me to the living room, where we both sat down on the couch. The familiarity of the room, with its worn furniture and family photos lining the walls, only made the weight in my chest feel heavier. My father waited patiently, his eyes filled with concern as he watched me struggle to find the words. Finally, I just blurted it out, the whole awful story spilling from my lips in a rush of pain and anger. I told him about the party, about Emily's humiliation, about finding her with another man, and then her desperate confession outside. The words felt heavy, each one dragging me further down, but I needed to say them, needed to make someone else understand what I was going through. When I finished, my father was silent for a long moment, his face etched with a mix of shock and sadness. "Mark," he said quietly, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea things were this bad." "I didn't either," I replied, my voice hoarse. "It all just fell apart so quickly. I don't know what to do, Dad. I don't know how to fix this." He reached out and put a hand on my shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight. Take it one step at a time. We'll be here for you, whatever you decide." I nodded, grateful for his support, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I don't know how to move on from this," I admitted. "I don't even know where to start." "You start by taking care of yourself," he said firmly. "Get some rest tonight, and we'll figure out the next steps in the morning. Whatever happens, you're not alone in this." He offered to make up the guest bed for me, but I declined. Instead, I collapsed on the couch, exhaustion finally catching up with me. My father draped a blanket over me and left me to my thoughts, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind was still racing, replaying the events of the night over and over. Eventually, I drifted off into a restless, troubled sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the dull light of dawn was filtering through the curtains. My body ached with fatigue, my mind still heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that it had all been a bad dream. But the hollow feeling in my chest quickly reminded me that it was all too real. I found my parents in the kitchen, sitting at the table with cups of coffee. They both looked up as I entered, concern etched on their faces. "How did you sleep?" my mother asked softly. "Not great," I admitted, sinking into a chair. "But I need to go home. I need to figure out what happens next." My father nodded in understanding. "Take it easy today, Mark. Don't rush into anything." I finished the coffee my mother had poured for me, trying to gather the strength to face the day. After thanking them both for their support, I left their house and drove home, dreading what I might find when I walked through the door. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The silence felt oppressive, like a dark cloud hanging over everything. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest as I called out, "Emily? Olivia? Jacob?" There was no answer. My footsteps echoed through the empty house as I searched every room, my anxiety growing with each passing second. The master bedroom was untouched, the bed still made, and Olivia's room was the same. It was as if they had simply vanished. Panic gripped me as I realized that Emily and Olivia were gone. The feeling of emptiness deepened, twisting into something darker and more frantic. I tried calling Emily's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice shaking as I pleaded with her to call me back, to let me know where she was and that Olivia was safe. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Without wasting any more time, I drove to the nearest police station. I could barely think straight as I walked up to the front desk, my heart pounding in my chest. The officer on duty looked up, surprised by the urgency in my demeanor. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I need to file a report," I said, my voice trembling. "My wife and daughter are missing." I don't know where they've gone, and I can't reach them." The officer's expression turned serious as he quickly grabbed a form and began asking me questions. I explained everything, from the events of the previous night to finding my home empty that morning. Every word felt like a fresh stab of fear, the realization that I might have lost more than just my marriage sinking in deeper with each passing second. After I finished, the officer assured me that they would start looking into it immediately. He took down all the details, Emily's description, Olivia's, and the make and model of our car. I thanked him, though the words felt hollow, as if nothing I could say or do would make a difference. As I left the station, the weight of everything came crashing down on me. I had no idea where Emily had taken Olivia or what she was thinking. The fear of the unknown gnawed at me, threatening to pull me under. All I could do was wait and hope that somehow I would find them before it was too late. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and exhaustion. Every waking moment was consumed by the search for Emily and Olivia and the gnawing fear that something terrible had happened. I barely slept, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios, each one more horrifying than the last. The police were doing everything they could, but as the hours turned into days, my hope began to fray at the edges. My parents stayed by my side, their presence a constant source of support, even as I struggled to keep myself together. My father made countless phone calls, reaching out to anyone who might know where Emily had gone, while my mother took care of Jacob, trying to shield him from the growing tension. But despite our efforts, there was no word from Emily, no clue as to where she had taken Olivia. Then, on the fourth day, my phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but I answered it immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mr. Collins," the voice on the other end said. "This is Officer Daniels with the local police department. We've located your wife and daughter." Relief and fear crashed over me in equal measure. "Are they okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They're both safe," Officer Daniels assured me. "We found them staying at a motel about an hour from here. Your wife was cooperative when we approached her, and Olivia seems to be unharmed." I closed my eyes, the tension in my chest loosening just a fraction. "Thank God," I whispered, leaning heavily against the wall. "Can I see them?" "I bring Olivia home, and there's something you should know first." Daniel said, his tone cautious. "Your wife, she's very upset. It seems she didn't intend to disappear permanently. She was trying to keep Olivia with her because she thought you were going to take her away." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Take her away?" I repeated, struggling to understand. "Why would she think that?" "There's a lot of confusion on her part," Daniel explained, "but we've managed to convince her to come back. However, I think it's important that you both talk this through, perhaps with legal counsel present. It's clear there's been a breakdown in communication." I thanked him and quickly gathered my things, my mind reeling with the implications of what I had just heard. Emily had taken Olivia because she was afraid of losing her, afraid that I would take her away just as she had feared. It was all so twisted, so unnecessary, and yet it had brought us to this breaking point. When I arrived at the station, Emily was sitting in a small interview room, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Olivia sat beside her, looking scared and confused, clutching a worn stuffed animal I recognized as her favorite. The sight of them, so vulnerable, brought a fresh wave of emotion crashing over me. Emily looked up as I entered the room, her expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. "Mark," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't lose her. I thought you were going to take her away from me, that you'd turn her against me, and I panicked. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to lash out, to tell her how much pain she had caused, how she had nearly broken me with her actions. But seeing her like this, broken and terrified, all I could feel was a deep, weary sadness. "Emily," I said quietly, forcing myself to stay calm. "You didn't need to do this. You didn't need to take Olivia away. I would never keep her from you, but what you did, it's not something I can just overlook." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I messed up. I just I was so scared and I wasn't thinking clearly. I thought if I could just keep her with me, everything would be okay. It's not okay, Emily, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. None of this is okay. What happened between us? It's broken. I don't know if it can ever be fixed. She flinched at my words but didn't argue. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice small and defeated. I'm going to file for divorce, I said, the decision solidifying in my mind even as the words left my mouth. And I'm going to file for custody of Olivia and Jacob. They need stability, and after everything that's happened, I don't think you can provide that right now. Her face contorted in anguish as she sobbed, burying her head in her hands. Olivia clung to me, tears flowing down her own cheeks, her eyes wide and terrified. It tore me apart to see them in such distress, but I knew I had made the right choice. My children needed a secure, stable home, and after everything that had transpired, I wasn't sure Emily could provide that any longer. The woman I once loved was engulfed in her own suffering and fear, and until she could find a way to heal, I couldn't entrust her with our children's well-being. The weeks that followed were a grueling slog through the legal system, sapping my remaining strength. Deciding to file for divorce was one of the hardest choices I ever faced, but it was the only viable option. I couldn't continue pretending that things could go back to normal after what had happened. The trial was emotionally draining, with each side presenting their case in a courtroom that felt like a battleground. The custody battle was especially bitter, with both sides presenting their arguments about what was best for the children. Emily's lawyer contended that she had always been a dedicated mother, driven by fear and confusion rather than ill intent. They portrayed her as someone who had made a grave mistake but was still capable of being a loving and responsible parent. In contrast, my attorney presented the facts. Emily had taken Olivia without warning, disappearing without considering the impact on our family. They highlighted her instability and erratic behavior, which had led to the crisis. Sitting through the trial was painful, listening to the minutiae of our lives being examined, but it was necessary. My children's future was at stake, and I couldn't afford to lose. Emily had moments of vulnerability during the trial, breaking down and pleading with the judge to understand her perspective. She admitted to taking Olivia, her fears of losing her family, and decisions driven by desperation. It was evident she regretted her actions, but the damage had already been done. I took the stand and recounted the events leading up to this point. I talked about my love for my children, my concerns for their safety and stability, and my constant efforts to do what's best for them. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but I had to remain strong for Olivia and Jacob. In the end, the judge's decision focused on the children's best interests. After considering all arguments, the court awarded me full custody of Olivia and Jacob, allowing Emily only supervised visits until she could prove her stability. It was a bittersweet victory, leaving me both relieved and deeply saddened. After the ruling, Emily withdrew from our lives almost entirely. She missed her scheduled visits, and her calls dwindled until they stopped altogether. It was as if she had disappeared, leaving behind only painful memories. I tried to shield Olivia and Jacob from the worst, providing as much love and stability as I could. But there were nights when Olivia would ask about her mother, her voice filled with confusion and sadness. All I could do was hold her close and reassure her that everything would be okay, even when I wasn't entirely sure myself. Over time, we began to heal. The wounds Emily left behind slowly started to mend, though they never fully disappeared. I focused on my children, rebuilding our lives, and forging a new path forward. The shadow of what had happened lingered, a constant reminder of how quickly everything could unravel. As for Emily, I had no idea where she went or what became of her. I could only hope that wherever she was, she found the peace she desperately sought. For me, the chapter of my life with her was closed, sealed by betrayal and the enduring love for my children. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to navigate, and I was determined to do everything in my power to protect Olivia and Jacob, giving them a life built on love, trust, and resilience.